Dr. Anthony Fauci joins us now. Thanks so much for your time tonight, Doctor. Of course, this is the 5th full day of the Biden administration, but there seems to be a common problem that this administration has to contend with that's essentially spilling over from the previous one. Many states have complained about a lack or shortage of vaccine doses. This weekend, the head of the CDC said one of the biggest problems right now is I can't tell you how much vaccine we have, and if I can't tell it to you, then I can't tell it to the governors. What, in your mind, needs to be done to get this right as far as smoothing out the process between the federal government and the states and American arms?
You know, I think you just said it. And what has happened before is that there was an inconsistent partnership between the federal government and the states. I mean, on the one hand, you don't want the federal government to do it all, but you also don't want to just leave the states on their own and say, here you go, here's the vaccine, go ahead and do what you want. You've got to have a steady flow of material. You've got to have communication. You have to have coordination and cooperation. And that's one of the things that right from the beginning, President Biden had said, among many other things that he wants to do, is strengthen the synergy and the cooperation and collaboration between the federal government and the states. And that's got to get fixed, because you're absolutely right. There are some areas of the country where there's vaccine lying around and it's not going into people's arms.
And as you know, many Americans just want to know, when are things going to be normal again? Today, the co-chair of the Biden COVID task force said he believes it won't be until the fall before everyone who wants a vaccine can get one. Is that your view as far as timeline? And what do you think that life, once we have the vaccine for anyone who wants to get it, what does America look like? Are still social distancing and still masks?
I think there will be a strong turn towards a degree of normality. I don't think it's going to be absolutely the way it was months before we even knew about COVID-19. I think there will be some public health issues that would need to be addressed, but I don't think it's going to be anything like it is right now or a couple of months ago, where you essentially had shutdown of many aspects of society. I think it will gradually get better. When you talk about vaccine available for people, you got to distinguish vaccine available for any kind of a person, not necessarily one who's in category 1A or 1B or 1C, but when it gets open for anybody who feels they would like to get vaccinated, that would at least be able to get it. I think that's going to be much sooner than the fall. I think it likely will be sometime in April, but the fall will be when you get to the point where everyone will have been vaccinated who wanted it.
Now, vaccine manufacturer Merck stopped development of both of its COVID vaccines today, citing a lack of immunity to the virus. How much is the U.S. government now banking on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has yet to be approved? And if that can't be distributed in the near future, will the timeline that you just mentioned get pushed back even further?
No, I think if J&J or the Janssen product comes through with an efficacy that's good enough to be able to be in the mix, that will be very helpful to get things done even sooner than we thought. But I think when you talk about Moderna and you talk about Pfizer and the possibility of getting even more from them, I think we can do it without it, though we'd be much welcome to get the Johnson & Johnson product.
Now, let's talk about these new strains. Thankfully, it appears thus far the more concerning South African strain is not in the U.S. Given how contagious the new U.K. strain is, some have suggested grocery store trips are much more risky at this point. The former head of the CDC suggested over the weekend that New Yorkers should consider only leaving home for essential activities. Do Americans need to be kind of back in that same mindset where we were in March and try to stay home even more to avoid these new, more contagious variants?
Well, I mean, it is estimated that we will have a dominance of the strain that was first in the UK and is now dominant in the UK. Some estimates would be that sometime by the end of March or early April, it will be the dominant strain. It is about, according to the estimates of the people in the UK, about twice as transmissible and maybe even increase in its virulence or its ability to cause serious disease. Whenever you have that, you obviously need to double down a bit on the public health measures, which we should be doing anyway. In other words, we should be doing the kinds of things that we've been speaking about consistently now for months. Physical distancing, uniform wearing of masks, avoiding congregate settings, particularly indoors, doing things, weather permitted, as much outdoors as we possibly can, and washing your hands very frequently. If everyone uniformly did that, regardless of the mutant involved, we'd be much better off.
Some have suggested that in especially hard-hit states like North Dakota, that the population may be getting close to or has already reached herd immunity, as so many people there have already been infected and there aren't as many residents to vaccinate. Do you think that that's the case, that North Dakota or possibly some other states have already reached herd immunity?
You know, I think that they would be approaching a degree of protection from the standpoint of already having a lot of people. You've got to be careful because herd immunity is not an absolute yes or no. If you have a lot of people who are either vaccinated or have already been infected, you could approach herd immunity and get a degree of protection from it, as opposed to the absolute, which we know with some diseases what that number is. Our most experience with that is with measles. We know with the highly contagious measles and a very effective vaccine, 98% effective, we know that when you get below a certain level of immunity in the community, that you start to lose that protection from herd immunity. We don't yet quite know what that number is for COVID. We think it's somewhere around 70 to 85%. But when you get up to 50, 60%, you're getting close to it. So it isn't as if you don't have any effect with that. You're starting to get some good effect. So in answer to your question, it could be that given the amount of infection that have occurred there and the fact that they're doing pretty good on the distribution of vaccine, they may already be approaching that level of herd immunity, even though they're not absolutely there yet.
Now, in a wide-ranging interview with the New York Times, you talked about how in the heart of the pandemic, the president asked you to be more positive. What was that like in the time, and how difficult was it for you to feel like you were on the sidelines, unable to speak up honestly about what the reality was?
Well, I did speak up honestly about what the reality was, and that likely was one of the things that put me on the sideline. I mean, I was always, and I was not, it didn't give me any great pleasure in contradicting the President of the United States. As I've said, you know, in that interview that I gave, that I have a great deal of respect for the office of the presidency, but there comes a time when you hear things that are being said that are just not reality. They're not in accordance with what is actually going on. And at that point, in order to maintain my integrity as well as the good of the American public, I had to come forth and say, no, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. We're not turning the corner. Things are not as good as you're saying as it is. And as you know, when I did that, for one reason or other, I was not as able to be public as possible because I was not let out to the press.
Biden will be the 7th president that you've now advised. And I do want to briefly get your thoughts on this past year. Your life has personally been threatened during this pandemic, and you said that you opened a letter at one point and white powder popped out all over you. What happened next in that moment? And also, if you could tell us a bit about the conversation that you had with your wife about the pros and cons of potentially quitting once your life and your wife and your children's lives were being threatened.
You know, this is the life I chose, and this is what I do. So as strange as it may seem to people, you know, threats on my life, harassment of me does not bother me as much at all as the effect it has on my wife and my children, because my wife is being harassed. My children, my adult daughters, are getting harassed. You know, with all of the information that's out there online, everybody knows one's phone number, one's address. There's very little you can do about it. So I get more concerned, if not outraged, at the impact it has on my children. With regard to what you asked, the day that I innocently and probably stupidly opened up an envelope and just pulled out a letter, and the powder came all over my face and all over my chest and my shirt. You know, ultimately, as I said in the interview, I said, well, there's one of three possibilities here. Either it's a hoax, it's anthrax, which would mean that I'd have to go on ciprofloxacin for about a month or two, or it's ricin, which means I'm a dead duck no matter what I do. You know, it was interesting. I took a bit of a fatalistic view from that. Thank goodness my security detail, told me, don't move, stay in the room, don't come out because we'll be contaminating everything, and we'll get the hazmat people there. And they did, and I had to get, they sprayed me with my clothes on, with my clothes off. It was terrible. But the most negative part about that entire experience was it frightened the heck out of my children when they found out about it, and my wife too. So that's the thing that people don't understand, that the thing that really bothers me. I mean, I've decided I'm doing something that might be dangerous, but that's it. I chose it. My children did not choose that. So that's the thing that bothered me the most.
Right, understandably so. Lastly, I'd like to play a soundbite from your former colleague, Dr. Deborah Birx, from over the weekend when asked about what her biggest mistake was this past year.
I always feel like I could have done more, been more outspoken, maybe been more outspoken publicly. I didn't know all the consequences of all of these issues.
If you are able to reflect back on this crazy past year, what would you say would be your biggest mistake? Or beyond that, maybe if you could have a mulligan and do something over, what would it be?
Very likely it would have been early on to really try to get as much more information about the fact that this virus can be spread by people without symptoms. And once you know that it can be spread with people without symptoms, you don't have to have a lot of sick people around for you to do some dramatic public health recommendations, because you know that insidiously it is under the radar screen spreading. We did not know that then. I wish that I had known it earlier than I knew it, because if I did, there would have likely been differences and more stringent recommendations.
Sure, makes a lot of sense. Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you as always for your time, your knowledge, your insight. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.